We're beginning now to study the book of Amos. And this is our first lesson. And we're looking at the book of Amos in the Minor Prophets. And we style it as Jehovah's general judgments, or Yahweh's, probably Yahweh would be a better translation, or the Lord's general judgments upon Jews and Gentile alike. So he addresses this while it's addressed to Israel. He makes points for the Gentiles as well. I believe that they were under a patriarchal law and that they had the patriarchal law. All people had the patriarchal law from creation up to Sinai. And then the Jews, the children of Israel, were separated out with their own special law. And everybody else, all the rest of the people in the world, were under the patriarchal law. And the Jews, I believe the law of Moses ended at the cross, legally ended. Now, we know they were practicing it for a while after that, up until AD 70. But I believe that I'm convinced that from my study of Daniel chapter 9 and some other points I put together, that the patriarchal law ended in Acts 10. So that God continued with them, and he wasn't having the gospel preached to them until Acts chapter 10. So God is addressing these principles, and on the 21 lessons I gave on the patriarchal law, I laid out and proved and established that the patriarchal law contained the same moral code as the law of Moses, and both of them have the same moral code as we have in the New Testament. I believe the moral codes have always been the same. That's my conclusion. Now, the Lord's general judgment upon Jew and Gentile alike, Amos 1, verse 1 through chapter 2, verse 16. What we have here now, to make a note for myself. What we have here is we're going to have our heading and introduction, chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. And then we'll separate it out. We'll be looking at judgments come upon Israel's neighbors in chapter 1, verse 3 through about chapter 2, verse 3. And then we'll be looking at some other aspects of it, but we'll follow that up later. Okay? This was a shepherd from Judah. Remember, after the death of Solomon, Rehoboam, his son, very foolishly caused the division of the nation. So the northern 10 tribes pulled away and formed their own nation called Israel. And the southern 2 tribes, that would be Judah and Benjamin, they formed a nation called Judah. So Amos was a shepherd from Judah, the southern kingdom. Now, if we study carefully, the way I read it, the vast majority of the Levites left the northern kingdom and came to the southern kingdom. So that strengthened them. And there were remnants of faithful that wanted to be faithful to God and not be worshipped idols, who left the northern 10 tribes and went and lived in Judah. That was quite a sacrifice, because they sacrificed their properties. They gave up their lands and their houses and their property so that they might serve God. I don't think we recognize those people for what they gave and what they sacrificed. But that's another study in itself. And if you study in Kings and Chronicles, you can draw that conclusion. The Lord's general judgment upon Jew and Gentile alike in chapter 1, verses 2 through 1 through 2:16. So we have our heading, an introduction, and then a superscription. Verse 1. The words of Amos, who was among the herdsmen of Tekoa, which he saw concerning Israel in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah, and the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel, 2 years before the earthquake. When he says the earthquake, there must have been a very large earthquake at this time. And we have it mentioned here, and there may be another passage in the Bible that mentions it or refers to it, or at least earthquakes in some sense. And this might be a significant earthquake, probably was. And it was in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Judah, Israel. Remember, Israel is the northern 10 tribes. Now, 2 years before the earthquake, I received this message, this revelation from God. He was the herdsman of Tekoa. We'll look at that more carefully. In 2 Kings 14:23 through 15:7, and 2 Chronicles 26, verses 1 through 23, we have the reign of King Uzziah. Now, Uzziah had another name, Azariah, so he had two different names. So he's called that. You need to read this history of 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles. And now 2 Kings, books of 1st and 2 Kings, look at the kingdom from the standpoint of the kings. And Chronicles, 1st and 2 Chronicles, look at the kingdom from the standpoint of the priesthood and the temple. So that's more emphatic. So what we look at, we put both of these passages together, and we can see what's going on during the time of Azariah, or Uzziah, as he's also called. We see the spiritual state of the nation. That'll give you a background to help you kind of understand what Amos is addressing his passage to. We do not have any information about the earthquake that is mentioned in this verse. Perhaps archaeology will shed some light on this subject sometime in the future. The earthquake must have been significant for it to be mentioned in this context. I think it was probably a big earthquake. They didn't have a Richter scale back then, but your Richter scale, every one on the Richter scale, it goes up by a factor of 10. It's a logarithmic base 10 logarithm. So a 1 on the Richter scale, 2 on the Richter scale is 10 times stronger than a 1. A 3 is 10 times stronger than a 2. A 4 is 10 times stronger than a 3, and so forth. Every one you jump, it multiplies by 10 because it is logarithmic. But that's enough mathematics. So it must have been significant. I don't know where it would have been on the Richter scale. They didn't have the Richter scale back then. The earthquake is mentioned in Zechariah 14:5 and possibly Josephus' Antiquities 9 and 10:4. So the earthquake, it probably is the same earthquake of Zechariah. No, that's several years later. I realize that, several hundred years later. But it was a significant earthquake. We in the United States talk about the big earthquake that occurred in San Francisco nearly about 100 years ago. And we mentioned that, and so it's mentioned. There was a very large earthquake up in the state of Alaska, too, at one time. And so they'll mention that earthquake. These were big earthquakes, significant. So I don't know what it would have been on the Richter scale, but it must have been a pretty massive earthquake.
Just to interject something, looking up about this online while you're talking there, Brother Fox, they're suggesting that there was a huge mega quake in Upper Israel, Northern Israel, back, in the 8th century BCE, and saying that it might have been as much as an 8.2 on a Richter scale because of archaeological evidence that they've seen in that area.
This would fit in, and this was 2 years after that earthquake. Okay, 2 years before it, I'm sorry. Thank you for bringing that up. Archaeology helps us sometimes. You got to be real careful in their interpretation of what they see, because sometimes they don't reason very well, but a lot of times archaeology, when it's analyzed properly, is always going to help the Bible, okay, if it's archaeology of that region of the world. All right, thank you. Thank you, Richard. Appreciate it. Tekoa is about 6 miles south of Bethlehem. And of course, Bethlehem is about 10 or 11 or 12 miles south of Jerusalem. So it's 6 miles south of Bethlehem, makes probably about It's about 15 or 16 miles south of Jerusalem, approximately somewhere thereabouts. 17 or 18 miles, I'm sorry. It's 6 plus 12. 17 or 18 miles south of Jerusalem. And it's 12 miles west of the Dead Sea. Now, I'm saying Bethlehem is about 11 or 12 miles south of Jerusalem. And it's 6 miles south of that. So 11 or 12 would be 17 or 18 miles. But it's 12 miles west of the Dead Sea. So you get a location for it pretty good with this. I'll have a map on the next slide. The reigns of Uzziah and Jeroboam II overlapped between 792 and 753 BC. Now you have to be real careful that when you're trying to put time into pictures, sometimes the numbers are rounded numbers. And so you got a problem with this. They're rounded numbers. Someone say, well, how old are you? Well, I say, and they'll ask me my age right now. I say, I'm 81 years old. Well, today's not my birthday. So I've rounded my age off to my last birthday. So you'd have to add, I'll take my birthday and add how many days and months and so forth to get the exact number of years and days that I've been living. And then if you really were fair about it, you'd add about 9 months to my life, because my life started about 9 months before I was physically born. But that's another factor. I'm just pointing out here, these dates, 792 is a rounded number and 753 is a rounded number. Right? The reigns of Uzziah and Jeroboam overlap between 792 and 753 BC. This dates the book of Amos at around or about 755 BC. And that's about the date that you gave, wasn't it, Richard? That time frame.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so right here, now what we have here, the writers would use the word circa, C-I-R-C-A, and that means about. So kind of, if you see that word, that's what it means. It just means about. There was a contemporary prophet. It appears that Hosea's work lasted longer than Amos's work, but Hosea was a contemporary prophet of Amos. But Hosea's work appeared to last longer than Amos's work. Okay. But most of them were contemporaries. Their prophetship, I call it that, or prophethood, overlapped their periods. They were prophets, overlapped. There's a map of that land right now. This is an ancient map, not a modern map. But right here we have, at the top of it, we have Sidon, Tyre, and we have Mount Hermon up here. It's 9,200, over 9,000 feet high. It has snow on it a lot of time during the year. Damascus over here to the east. Then we come down, we have Bashan, Sea of Galilee, and Nazareth, Mount Tabor. And we have the Sea of Galilee, and they have the Jordan River running down, and it flows into the Dead Sea. And other rivers here, Rabbah, Ammon, and this would be the Ammonites where they lived. They lived this Ammon. And so we have the plains of Moab, and there's Mount Nebo. That's where Moses went up on the mountain and saw the Torah in the land. And his life ended there at that point. Right here is a plain. It's called Araba. Araba, which is a flat plain. Plain, a plain. Now, Edomites were down here at the bottom, but right over here is Tekoa. I'm getting too much into geography. There's Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and Tekoa, and that route right there. And then the Red Sea, Dead Sea is down here, about 11, 12 miles away. So this region is not very big. You could get it between Oklahoma City and Wichita, Kansas, if you were looking at the United States. Beersheba, Beer is a well, and Sheba, well of the else. Okay, Beersheba, that's a well, and here's the river of Egypt right down here that separated Egypt from Israel. Okay. Let me see, let me go on. Israel went down further down here, but we won't worry about that right now. We got Tekoa down here. Any questions about where it was? Okay. I will go on. And let's look at the theme of the section now. Verse 2, he continues. And a lot of times he's going to tell you what this letter is going to be about, this book or this writing. And he said, Jehovah will roar from Zion and will utter his voice from Jerusalem, and the pastures of the shepherds shall mourn, and the top of Carmel shall wither. So right here we have the top of Carmel shall wither. And right up here is Mount Carmel, right up here, right here. So this he's talking about here. So there's Mount Carmel. I forgot that I had it on this map, right there. And so Tekoa is way down here, down in this region, right in here. It's a rugged region, and the sheep that he herded were very, very strong and tough. And we read of the roar, perhaps of a lion. The Asiatic lion is solitary. They don't go in prides like the African lions do, but they're a threat to all of the livestock for certain. They're about the same size as African lions, and so they definitely can bring your livestock down pretty easily. Asiatic lion can. The first half of this verse seems to be a quote of Joel 3:16. Let's go back and look at it again. And the Lord will roar from Zion, utter his voice from Jerusalem. So we see that. Let's come over here and look here at Joel 3:16. The Lord will roar from Zion, utter his voice from Jerusalem. So it appears that he's quoting Joel, or at least he's using the same figures of speech as Joel. If he's quoting Joel, that means Joel existed before and was written before Amos. It would fit in with my time frame, my dating of the book of Joel as being earlier than Amos. And the heavens and the earth shall shake, but Joel will be a refuge unto his people. And then the shaking, heaven and earth shaking, might be an allusion to the earthquake. And when all of this happens, the people are a refuge. And you take an 8.2 on the Richter scale, it's a pretty heavy earthquake. It's a pretty big earthquake. I think, what you say, 8.2? Is that what you said, Richard? Somewhere thereabouts.
Yes, sir. Okay.
And that'd be a pretty strong earthquake. It's 8.2 is 10 times stronger than a 7.2 in strength. So a 7.2 is pretty hefty earthquake. 8.2 is really big. So Joel will be a refuge unto his people. People would flee in a stronghold of the children of Israel. So he uses that earthquake as a figure here to help them see God is in control, and you can still flee to God even if you have troubles. And so when Judah had troubles because of her sin, and Israel had, the people of Israel, the nation of Israel, more than 10 tribes had trouble because of their sin, then the earthquake came, figuratively speaking, which might be foreign armies overrun them. The people could still seek God and still seek the comfort in God. If they turned to God, he would be with them. This might be what he's referring to here. He's a stronghold to the children of Israel. Probably the children of Israel would be for both the northern 10 tribes and the southern 2 tribes, because all of them were the children of Israel, right? Both nations were. By quoting Joel, he appears to be appealing to the judgment that came upon them during the time of Joel as warnings against continuing in their sins. So I think he's appealing to Joel. I think he's quoting Joel. And in doing this, he's saying, take heed and take warning from this, what happened in Joel's time and with the locust plagues, and understand that God was warning you. And now you got an earthquake you're going to have. And they had this earthquake, and that was another warning. God is in control. I don't know what happened. An earthquake like that would most of your buildings are going to crumble. You're going to have houses crumble, buildings crumble, particularly if they're made out of mud-dried bricks. So that would shake the ground like crazy. The ground just collects water, it just moves around, shakes. I've been in an earthquake of about a 6 or 6.5 or somewhere thereabouts, and it shook the ground pretty good. On the other hand, Joel promised that if they would repent, say back to Joel, God would not punish them. So again, he's wanting them to repent. So there's a need to repent. Now Israel, and I believe the whole Jordan River, as it runs down through a fault line, and we see this fault line going all the way down into Africa, and there's a line down all the way through Africa. In fact, they're claiming that Africa is splitting apart. And it's going to take 100, 200 million years for it to split apart, according to the atheists, but it's supposed to be splitting right now. Okay. And we have the Great Rift Valley in Africa, it's called, after the occurring. I explained rifts in my study of the biblical flood, but you'll need to get into that. That's, I think, 75 lessons or something like that. Judgments to come upon Israel's neighbors. Now, not only Israel, but the neighbors are going to be judged as well. That earthquake would affect them as well as it would Israel. Verse 3, and then he's going to talk about judgment on Damascus in verses 3 through 5. Damascus, of course, being the capital of Syria, and there's still a city there called Damascus to this day. And some of the street through the city is called Straight. It's even called Straight back in the New Testament times. I guess it's just one straight through the city. I'd love to have gone there, but I wouldn't go there now by any means. It's the capital of Syria, was to be punished for their sins as well. So God wasn't just concerned about Israel, he was concerned about other nations too. He loves all mankind. Thus saith the Lord, thus saith Jehovah, thus saith Yahweh, for 3 transgressions of Damascus, yea, for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they have threshed Gilead with threshing instruments of iron. Gilead is part of Israel. So they've taken those people and thrashed them, and so that's a figure of speech, and how they treated them, made slaves out of them, and so forth. So 3 transgressions, 4. Now this is, of course, poetic in the Hebrew sense. For 3, yea, for 4, say. For 6, yea, for 7. We saw that in Proverbs. And so he'll use that. And this is a figure of speech for him. Turn away the punishment thereof, because they have threshed Gilead. Their capital was to be destroyed with fire, Amos 1:4. But I will send a fire into the house of Hazael, and it shall devour the palace of Ben-Hadad. So here, Ben-Hadad was one of their kings in the palace of Ben-Hadad. Okay, I think Ben is Hebrew, and they spoke an Aramaic type language very closely related to Hebrew, and probably both, and they're both Semitic languages, descendants of Shem. And Ben, probably his son of Hadad. Okay. The Syrians were carried away into captivity by the Assyrians in Amos 1:5. I'll break the bar of Damascus, cut off the inhabitant from the valley of Aven, and him that holdeth the scepter from the house of Eden. So there's not going to be a king again. And this people of Syria shall go into captivity unto Kir, saith Jehovah. So they're going to go off into Assyrian captivity in a place called Kir, part of Assyria. Then judgment was come upon Gaza. Now, Gaza is the very place of Israel, the modern nation that calls itself Israel. It's not the true Israel. The true Israel is the church, the Lord's church. But it will come upon Gaza because of her slave trade in Amos 1, verses 6 through 8. The Philistines, represented by Gaza, had overrun an area of Israel and depopulated it by selling all the inhabitants into slavery, according to verse 6. We'll get to that here. So they sold all the people into slavery and they took the land. Thus saith Jehovah, for 3 transgressions of Gaza, yea, for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they carried away captive the whole people to deliver them up to Edom. Now, see, I would almost suspect, I wouldn't say for sure, but I know how they misinterpret the Bible. Some premillennials may see this Gaza and they may say, what's going on in a place called Gaza right now? And they probably interpret this to be, a fulfillment of that prophecy. But they would have had to deliver them into the hands of Edom, to Edom, and Edom doesn't exist anymore. Okay. So again, this is talking about something that happened at that time, and it already happened. They had already carried these people away and sold them off to the Edomites. For this sin, Gaza would be destroyed by fire. But I will send a fire on the wall of Gaza, and it shall devour the palaces thereof. So this will be the Philistines. They're going to lose their power, and they're going to be destroyed, their cities. The other chief cities, Philistines, will be destroyed, and the Philistines would perish as a nation. This happened when the Babylonians overran them and destroyed them. And so this doesn't actually have to happen very immediately. It could be 200-300 years in the future. God doesn't see time like we see time. When the iniquity of the nations fall, he lets them be overrun and destroyed. But I believe it happened when the Babylonians overran them, and that we see that literally occurring when they overran those cities. Verse 8, I will cut off the inhabitants from Ashdod, that's one of their cities, and him that holdeth the scepter from Ashkelon, another one of their cities. I will turn my hand against Ekron, another one of the cities. The remnant of the Philistines shall perish, saith the Lord Jehovah. You can't find the Philistines anymore. They were sold off into slavery themselves and probably intermarried with other people, and they've been absorbed into other races. So they don't exist as a separate race or group of people any longer. We keep seeing judgment coming upon Tyre. Now, we can go back and see where Tyre was. I think I will let you see what I'm talking about. I'll go back. Put this in right here. Tyre is way up here at the top. Tyre. So that's what we have it way up here. There's the Phoenicians. And then the Philistines were down in this region down here. There's Ekron, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gaza. That's their cities. And they were overrun, okay? Now they're near Judah. And these other places up here are near the northern 10 tribes, okay? Now we have judgment on Tyre because she acted as a slave agents to sell them as slaves. Phoenicians, the capital city of Tyre, that was the capital city of Tyre, the Phoenician people. They were a seafaring people. They controlled the Mediterranean Ocean, or Mediterranean Sea, rather, during that time. No ship could get on the Mediterranean Sea without their permission. And if they did, if they got on without their permission, they would overrun it and take the ship and make slaves of the sailors, take all their cargo. They were like pirates. And again, Tyre, Sidon was one of the sons of Ham, one of Ham's sons. And he settled in that area. Tyre and Sidon were their two cities. Had broken the covenant made between Hiram and David. So they had a covenant with Hiram, their king, who had a covenant with David. And it was supposed to be for their nations, but they'd broken it. And they also seemed to depopulate an area by overrunning it, selling them into slavery, as we see in Amos 1:9, just like the other people had done. Thus saith Jehovah, For 3 transgressions of Tyre, yea, for 4 I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they delivered up the whole people to Edom. So I think they depopulated them. They sold the Edomites. So the Edomites would then take them and sell them into slavery. They'd be carried off into other lands across the Arabian Peninsula. And remember, it's not the brotherly covenant. You don't remember the covenant that Hiram made with King David. You've forgotten that covenant. It was made between those 2 nations. The walls were finally destroyed by Alexander the Great. Tyre, there's a whole bunch of information about Tyre. We don't have time to look at it, but it was destroyed in several different ways. At first, there was an island out away from the land, and they had population on that island, but they had a city on the mainland. And then that was destroyed, that city was destroyed, and the people fled to the island. And they were ships, they were sailors, and so they were safe there for a while. And finally, Alexander the Great built a causeway out, and they took it over, and the Phoenicians then lost Tyre. And so there's prophecies about that. And that's a very interesting study in itself to look at that. So at Amos 1:10, and I will send a fire on the wall of Tyre, and it shall devour the palaces thereof. This occurred in waves, and of course the prophecies of it, like the waves of the sea coming. So they came, one army came and destroyed some part, and then another army came. Finally, Alexander the Great destroyed completely. But it happened in waves. God determines the boundaries and times for nations, and God is in control. In Acts 17:26, and he made of one every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, have determined their appointed season and the bounds of their habitation. They should seek after God, if ever they may feel after him and find him, though he is not far from each one of them. So again, God is in control. He sets the boundaries of nations, the appointed times and the bounds. So we have the seasons and the bounds. The seasons, the time, the appointed season, appointed times, and the boundaries of those nations. God's in control. Judgment upon Edom came because of their stubborn unforgiveness. Thus said Jehovah, for 3 transgressions of Edom, yea, for 4 I will not turn away the punishment thereof. Because he did pursue his brother. Now, who was the brother of Edom? Well, Edom is another name for Esau. And of course, his brother is Jacob. Because he did pursue his brother with the sword. He sought to kill him. Did cast off all pity, and his anger did tear perpetually. His children, his offspring still hated him, and they held this grudge about what had happened. Now, if you study it carefully, you'll see Jacob made some bad choices, but he bought the birthright, and then Edom or Esau lied about it to his father. He said, he stolen my birthright. Well, he didn't steal it. You sold it. And he sold the birthright, and it was something that was holy because he profaned it. It became a profane thing to him, so it was holy. And we study this in some of the outlines that I've had for our school. 2 sets of outlines. That one would be the gist of the Bible, the other would be Introduction to the Bible. Those 2 together would be very helpful in that study. So he pursued his brother with the sword, and cast off all pity, and his anger did tear perpetually, and he kept his wrath forever. Right. Now in verse 12, he said, but I will send the fire upon Teman. That's one of their cities. And it shall devour the palace of Basra, another one of their cities. So the enmity of Esau, the father of the nation of Edom, is well known back in Genesis 27:41. Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing wherewith his father blessed him. Well, Esau had sold the blessing. He sold the birthright, which I believe was the right to be priest for the family, the spiritual leader for the family. But it didn't mean much to him because he wasn't a spiritually minded man. Today is morning for my father, and I will slay my brother Jacob. That's pretty serious. I'm going to slay your brother. And so a brother can steal from you. You can be angry with him, but killing him was going pretty far. But Jacob didn't really steal from him. Jacob took the blessing, and he got the birthright because it had been sold to him. Now, the blessing was something else. I think there's two things. There was the birthright and the blessing. And so he got the birthright, and that's to be the spiritual leader. That's a spiritual thing. And if Jacob had told his father that he'd bought the birthright, I believe it with all my heart that he would have said Esau is not worthy of it and would have given it to Jacob if he had just told him. I'm convinced in my mind that that's what would have happened. They didn't have to trick Jacob, didn't have to lie to him and trick him. The nation of Edom attempted to thwart God's plans for Israel in Numbers 20, continuing to do this hatred for centuries. Their chief cities would also be destroyed. In Amos 1:12, I will send a fire upon Teman, shall devour the palace of Bozrah, or destroy them. Now the Ammonites were descendants, and the Moabites were Ammonites and Moabites both were descendants of the two sons of Lot by his daughters from incest. And so the Ammonites and the Moabites. The Ammonites then were descendants of Lot, and because of her cruel and inhumane treatment, in Amos 1:13-15, thus saith Jehovah, again, he's getting the nations all around him. For 3 transgressions of the children of Ammon, yea, for 4. Ammon, Jordan, is one of the capital cities of the nation of Jordan. It's that region, that same area. For 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they have ripped up the women with child of Gilead, that they may enlarge their border. We have this mentioned in the Old Testament on at least one occasion where they would take a knife or a sword, cut a woman open who was pregnant, and let the baby fall out. Of course, that killed both the baby and the woman when they did this. And so this is one of the things they do, just open her up with a sword, let the baby fall out. And of course, then she's going to bleed to death and die too. The baby will die too. And then she'd be in terrible pain. It's a very cruel way to kill somebody. But that's what they did. They ripped up the woman with child of Gilead. Again, fire depicts the destruction of the cities. Fire is used over and over in the Old Testament as a means of punishment. Keep that in mind. In Amos 1:14, but I will kindle a fire in the wall of Rabbah, and it shall devour the palaces thereof, with shouting in the day of battle, the tempest in the day of the whirlwind. So there's going to be shouting in a tempest. This is going to happen. Devour the palaces with fire. Kindle a fire in their wall. One thing you can do, if they have wooden houses in there, just with the catapults, you can throw flaming all the other stuff that's burning over, things that are burning, and that will start a fire in that city. And if it's a city under siege, they don't have water to put the fire out. Just burn everything. Their king went into captivity in Amos 1:15. This occurred when they were overrun by the Babylonians. In Amos 1:5, and their king shall go into captivity, and he and his princes together, saith Jehovah. They took the king and his princes, his children. They all went into captivity. That's what happened with Judah when they were carried in captivity. And Daniel, I think Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego probably were also of royal blood, but I know Daniel was. I think all of them were. All blood. Judgment upon Moab now, the Moabites. Now again, remember he's the other son of Ammon, was one of the sons of Lot, and now he's the other son of Lot. and upon the Moabites because of her violent and vindictive hatred. He used the bones of the king of Edom, which Edom was to the south of Moab. They took the bones of the king of Edom and made mortar out of it to build bricks, to build houses. That's pretty awful to do such a thing as that. Thus said Jehovah, for 3 transgressions of Moab, yea, for I will not turn away thereof, because he burned the bones of the king of Moab into lime out of it. You can use lime on your fields as well. Again, their cities will be destroyed, and the Babylonians were the ones that destroyed them in verses 2 and 3. But I will send a fire upon Moab, and it shall devour the palace of Kirioth, and Moab shall die with tumult, with shouting, and with the sound of the trumpet. There are no nations called Edom, nations called Moab, no nations called Ammon. These 3 nations don't exist anymore. There's no nation called the Philistines, Philistia. There's no nation called by these other nations, Phoenicians. These nations don't exist as separate nations. I think some of their people still exist. That is, their ancestors. The Moabites are ancestors of some people in the world, but you can't figure out who they were. And so they can't determine who they were. Now, they were cousins to the Jews, descendants of Lot. Lot was Abraham's nephew. That's how that fits in. Okay. I will cut off the judge from the midst thereof, and I will slay all the princes thereof with him. And again, this is the Moabites. Verse 1. Now, God judges not only people, but nations for their sins. So whole nations are judged. In my lifetime, I know of 2 nations that I think were judged by God. One nation will be Japan, and their brutalness, they were brutal with other nations. And they were conquered, subjugated. And I know another nation that was subjugated. That was the nation of Germany during World War II, during my lifetime. And I think both nations were wicked in all the brutal things they did to people. And I'm fearful that the United States is as brutal as these nations, particularly with their own children, that is, with abortion and euthanasia. Okay, but let's go into the summary of the lesson. God judges not only people, but nations for their sins. God will punish nations if they do not repent. If nations repent of their collective sins, he will forgive them. So nations can commit collective sins. A group of people can commit a collective sin. There was a group of people that crucified Jesus. That was a collective sin. And they all had to repent of it. Any questions?